All right, thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. This is one of the first in our series of educational webinars that Max Solutions will be delivering. Looks like we have a good turnout today, so that just tells us some good, strong interest in this topic. So thank you very much. So for those of you who maybe don't know who we are, just a very brief introduction to Max Solutions. So we've been serving various markets, including the process industry, since about 1996. Today we offer many different products and services, ranging from PLC management to PLC change management software, remote access devices. We're a Kepware OPC reseller. We offer cybersecurity software and services, as well as our own alarm management software, which is known as ProcessVue. Some quick introductions for you. We have Ian Brown, who's our alarm rationalization and services manager. Ian has almost 40 years of experience in the process industries and has accumulated knowledge across a wide range of industries, and has held a variety of technical roles, technical maintenance management roles, and has been in alarm management consultancy role for about 12 years now. You have myself, who has previously worked for IMAC, Matricon and Honeywell in the alarm management arena over the last 13 years or so. I've held roles in technical support, site engineering, and sales and marketing, and I'm the product and sales manager for ProcessVue. So with that, I will hand you over to Ian, who will guide us through the main body of this presentation today. If you do have any questions during the presentation, you are able to raise them using the interface that's available to you. So please do that, and we will have a questions and answers session at the end of the presentation. Okay, Ian, so over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a wide variety of people tuned in today, from oil and gas, infrastructure, power and utilities, pharmaceutical plants. We even have some medical monitoring people and some third-party integrators and consultants listening in. For all of you, benchmarking is a real issue, and it's something you should be looking at and considering. So today, that's the topic of our webinar, is alarm system benchmarking. So today, I'm going to actually talk about what it really is, how you should do it, any tools you need, and what you're going to do after you've done your benchmark assessment. So let's crack on with the topic today. So as an opening thought on the screen there, if you were asked to tell anyone, a regulator or someone further up in your company, a senior manager, how well your system performed, your alarm system performed, could you actually tell them, hand on heart, could you tell them how good your alarm system is? And how would you be able to do that? Okay, the way you would do that is by measuring your alarm system. And I'm sure we've all heard typical quotes and adages: you can't manage, improve or control what you don't measure. You've got to do some kind of measurement. We've all heard quotations like that. The real question you want to know is, okay, what am I going to measure and how am I going to measure it? It's all about alarm system benchmarking. What and how. They're the really important things today. So before we begin, I'd just like to look at some definitions from the standards, the alarm management standards, IEC 62682. The definitions are the same in ISA 18.2 as well, for those of you who are not UK and Europe based. If we look at alarm management, we can see in red there, collection of processes and practices. In audit, we can also see work practices in there, as well as evaluation of alarm system performance. And of course, benchmark, the definition, is an initial audit. So looking at audit and alarm management, yes, we're looking at numerical performance, the alarm system performance, but we're also looking at work practices and processes. It's not just a straightforward numbers game. So just moving on, if we look at the alarm management life cycle, if we're going to look at improving our system, we need to know what it is we need to improve. And that's the whole point of doing a benchmark assessment. If we look in the alarm management life cycle, there are 3 entry points: A, H, and J, highlighted in green in the alarm management life cycle there. For greenfield sites that have no alarm system, no control system, A, entry point A, define your alarm philosophy first. Everything flows from there. For brownfield or mature sites, you're looking at a entry point H or J. H is your operation and maintenance. Your system is running, you're working. You need to evaluate how good or bad it is, and that's part of being an audit. And a benchmark is an an initial audit. So let's have a look at where we would look at our benchmark. If we look at a typical alarm improvement process, and this is the kind of workflow and process that we would recommend on our alarm management training course that you follow. This is a tried and tested process for improving alarms. You can see that auditing is a continuous feature that goes throughout the lifetime of your alarm system. And benchmark, up at the top left, is the first thing you're going to do. Without a benchmark, you don't know if your alarm philosophy is appropriate, you don't know if your alarm definitions are appropriate, you know nothing without actually doing a benchmark assessment. You may think you know, but do you actually? Okay, moving on. What is a benchmark assessment? That's what you're here for to find out about today. Okay, on the screen we've got analysis of alarm rates and performance. Yes, part of a benchmark assessment is a numerical assessment. How good or bad does my alarm system perform? But you are also going to need to review your control system. Is it configured correctly? Are there any design guidelines, default set for alarms? Alarms should be turned off unless justified. Hysteresis settings, for example, and timers. How are they designed? You're going to be looking at site procedures as well as your control system. And in site procedures, let's look at alarm philosophy. Is there one? Is it appropriate? Does it comply with the requirements of the standards? What about procedures such as management of change? Is that appropriate for alarm management? Do you have procedures, for example, for shelving of alarms? And more importantly, while you're looking at these things, are they actually used? Are they in general use? In order to do all these things, and I will elaborate a little more in a couple of slides' time, ideally you want to have a consistent approach. You are going to interview operators on the plant at their place of work. That's really important that you carry out your operator interviews to find out how the system works for them. Not how good or bad the operator is, but how the system works for them. If you have pre-prepared operator questionnaires, they're an aid memoir. You will have a consistent approach to how you actually interview the guys and the kind of information you're going to get there. You're not going to miss anything important. Of course, you're going to need copies of the standards and guidelines because this is what you are going to compare what you find against. It's no good looking at a system and then saying, what do I need to have? That's all embodied in the standards and the guidelines, and potentially in some of your regulatory commitments as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to be doing, and it's important that your assessor, the guy who's carrying out the assessment, he knows and understands what he should be looking for. He should be conversant with the standards and guidelines. He should look through all those procedures and know the kind of questions he needs to ask. And a lot of that is in preparation in some of your questionnaires and aid memoirs. So there's a lot goes on in a benchmark assessment. Once you've completed your benchmark assessment, it's great to sit and talk to people. It's great to watch what happens. It's great to look at numerical analysis. You need to create an assessment report. a detailed report, and I've got in there with classified recommendations. When I do an assessment report, what I do is I sectionalize it into various sections, and in each section I document what I expect to find, what are the requirements or good practices that I'm looking for. Then what do I actually find? And the gap between those drives your recommendations. And what I mean by classified recommendations are, for example, if I find something that's not being done or is at variance with the standards, and there needs to be something done to comply with the standards, to comply with your regulatory commitments, I would classify those as mandatory recommendations. There will be some recommendations I will come up with which I would classify perhaps as suggested, that says, if you've got nothing better to do and you've done all the things, you comply, you meet all the requirements, these are some nice things you could do to improve things even more. Think about your classification of your recommendations, but you need to do a good report. Okay, little bit about benchmark. We will come back to the process in a moment, but why do we need to do this? Okay, I appreciate the people from overseas, from the UK and Europe. In the UK, the Health and Safety Executive on their web pages has this statement about a great deal of evidence relating to the role of poorly designed alarm systems in major incidents. So alarms are part of incidents. Lack of response to alarms potentially causes incidents, amongst other things. I'm sure in other countries, in the USA you have OSHA, in other countries there will be regulators there who have the same kind of requirements. So we're going to look at Milford Haven in just a second, just a brief look at that. So why do we need to manage our alarms? The regulators expect it. If you're in the UK or Europe, Seveso regulations or the COMA regulations in 2015, which is the enactment of the Seveso directive in the UK. This is a legislative requirement. There is a requirement for you to manage your alarms. It's not an option. So there may be in other countries other regulations and other directives which must be complied with. So why do we need to do it? It's expected, and in some cases you have no choice. Briefly looking at the Texaco Milford Haven incident, which happened in 1994, there was an explosion and some fires on a chemical plant. Our health and safety executive in the UK carried out an investigation. Fortunately, no one was killed, but about £48 million was lost. 26 people were injured. The HSE carried out an investigation and commissioned a report by a company, by two guys called Bransby and Jenkinson. And the key factors they came up with in their HSE investigation were there were too many alarms and they were poorly prioritized. I believe about 87% of all the alarms on the plant were labeled as high priority. They had 275 alarms to deal with in the 11 minutes before the explosion. That's 1 every 2 seconds, approximately. The guys had no chance to deal with the alarms. They couldn't control it. Maybe they could have done if their alarms had been more appropriate. Control room displays didn't help them. So questions you should be asking yourself as part of your assessment, as part of could you justify how your system works, do you actually know how many alarms are in your system? Have you reviewed the priorities? Have your operators been trained? These are some questions you should be thinking of that drive you towards having your benchmark assessment. Why do we need to manage our alarms? I've mentioned the UK Health and Safety Executive. The inspectors in the HSE have what they call toolkits for various different disciplines. The one for alarm management, I've got the first 6 questions on the screen here at the moment. So how many alarms are in your system? How big is your alarm system? If we look at question number 6, these are questions the regulators will ask any operator. Have the current alarm systems been reviewed? Wow, that's a benchmark assessment, surely. What was the outcome of the review? I've got it documented in my assessment report. Is it being implemented? Yes, we have prioritized recommendations that we are following through. So these are important questions and the kind of things that you should be looking for. So yes, you will be asked for these things, and a benchmark assessment will begin to address these issues. Do you have any requirement by regulators to address these issues? That's one question. What about your alarm system performance? If you operate a control system as opposed to you go to a control system as an integrator or a consultant, do you walk into the control room and hear the alarm system going beep, 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 and you walk out of the control room thinking, that's not good. We need to do something about that. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? Your benchmark assessment will tell you. What if I think it sounds a lot of work? Do I really need to do it? What might it cost if I do nothing? Okay, there's a potential for harm to the environment, to people. You may face regulatory prosecution, fines. Okay, really? Is that going to happen? Regulators and the judiciary, certainly in the UK, are getting tougher. Let's have a look at briefly 2 examples. Last year in 2017, although not all to do with alarms, a water company was fined £20,400,000 for environmental breaches. During the trial, the prosecution made statements, alarms going off for days on end, certainly for more than 24 hours. Another alarm should have been dealt with in 2 hours, took 37 hours. These are statements from the prosecution to do with alarms. In summing up, the judge said, I have to make the fine sufficiently large that they, the water company, get the message. It should not be cheaper to offend than to take appropriate precautions. So it shouldn't be cheaper to do nothing about alarm management than it is to be fined a couple of £100. I'm going to make sure you get the message. The water company were given 21 days to pay, and they were told that the costs had to be borne by the shareholders, not the customers, and the courts would be watching to make sure that was the case. Another trial last year, a steel company was fined £1 million. In sentencing, the judge listed 7 failings. They included failed alarms, a lack of staff in the control cabin. Something you might consider looking at when you're doing your benchmark assessment. Is the alarm system in an unmanned control room? Is it manned all the time? Do they have an appropriate number of people to respond to alarms? Just something else you might like to think about in your assessment. When the judge summed up, he regarded the failures relating to the absence of proper and effective alarms as being acutely serious. Large companies must expect to pay heavy fines when they fail in their health and safety duties. It must be made clear that health and safety obligations are exactly that, even when there's a challenging commercial climate. Yes, alarm management will have a cost associated with it, but that cost has to be less than the fine that you will attract if you do nothing. And that's what's happening with regulators and judiciary at the moment. So, bearing that in mind, as an operator of an alarm system, how confident are you that everything's being addressed and everything's working properly? Do you absolutely know without doing a comprehensive benchmark assessment? I carried out a benchmark assessment about 4 or 5 years ago on a pharmaceutical site. They were regulated by the FDA. They were making pills. They were a top-tier COMA site, which is control of major accident hazards, for those people who don't know that. And they had an environmental permit. In their COMA report, they had taken credit for alarms in protective systems. So operators and their response to alarms were part of the layers of protection for the safety systems. The FDA required that before batches were started, a campaign of batches, they had to test certain measurements and alarms. It was all in their regulatory requirements. The environmental permit, number of alarms were identified that were fundamental to the monitoring of point source emissions to atmosphere, to water. Unfortunately, on this site, alarms were not only routinely ignored, but they were turned off. because the operators had been told the control system has been configured to take care of everything. If an alarm occurs, it will be put into a software safe state and you don't have to worry. When you come back from your meeting, and yes, they did leave for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time from the shop floor, when they came back, all you have to do is press retry. It'll all sort itself out. They were in breach of all their regulatory commitments, and they didn't actually realize this until I did an assessment and pointed all these things out. So, just something to think about. Is there anything like that on your site? Are you aware of everything? Does everybody understand their requirements and their regulatory obligations? If not, how are you going to perform a benchmark assessment? Do you need any specialist tools? Okay, I've mentioned pre-prepared questionnaires before. There are some examples in the EMUA guidelines that you can use and build on those questions, little aid memoir notes to remember things. So you need some questionnaires. You're going to need a software analysis tool, such as ProcessVue Analyzer that Mac Solutions provides. We sell a tool for looking at your alarm rates. How many alarms per 10 minutes do you have? Is your alarm system overloaded? What are the frequently occurring alarms? You will need some kind of software tool to analyze your data. That's part of your assessment. You will also need, obviously, the current versions of standards and guidelines. They're the real tools you need. So some are easy, software questionnaires, you can write them out yourself, copy them out the EMUA guidelines. You will need an analysis tool like ProcessVue Analyzer. You will need the standards and guidelines. Two other essential tools you will require, your eyes and ears. Because when you're interviewing operators, when you're looking at processes and procedures, you need to observe and listen. That's an essential part of doing an assessment. Because, for example, an operator will tell you when you interview him, this is what I do, this is how I respond to alarms, this is how I shelve alarms. While you're writing your notes, listening to the guy and watching what's happening, sorry guys, we need to learn to multitask for this job. While you're doing that, you'll actually probably observe the operator doing something different to what he's just told you. So observation, listening, it's a really important tool. So they're the basic tools for performing a benchmark. Okay, if we move on, numerically, with our analysis tool like ProcessVue Analyzer, we're going to look at the alarm rates. How many alarms per 10 minutes do we get? What are the most frequently occurring alarms? What is the distribution of priorities of alarms enunciated to the operator? These are three metrics that are part of the standards. They're recommended in the standards and the guidelines. In the EMUA guidelines, there's also a thing called a usefulness questionnaire, which you distribute to your operators prior to your assessment, so there's some pre-work to do, and they assess or rate 10 consecutive alarms during their shift. Is it a useful alarm? Do they carry out an action? Is it a nuisance? And you build up a usefulness view of the system. You'll also look at potentially, again in the EMUA guidelines, there's a word model for the performance of your system in steady state and upset state. Is your system overloaded? Is it robust, stable? A number of measurements. So they're numerical measurements, which you will get from your numerical software analysis tool. Okay, but that's just one small part, alarm system performance at the bottom of the screen. That's one small part. So holistically speaking, we're going to look at absolutely everything to do with alarms. The management. Okay, do you have an alarm philosophy? Is there a philosophy or a site strategy how alarms are managed? Are roles and responsibilities defined? Are all those things encompassed and enshrined within your philosophy? I mentioned earlier, design guidelines. How are alarms designed? Are there defaults for hysteresis, for timers? Is that all there? What about the role of your alarm system? Does your alarm system have any safety role? Is it implicated in any safety systems? Are alarms and the response to alarms one layer of protection? That's all included as part of your regulatory compliance with the FDA, the COMA regulations, a safety report. You may have, for example, a drinking water inspectorate, whatever responsible regulatory body is associated with your process. What about procedures and documentation? We look at those. You need to read all those procedures and through your observation, find out if they're being used. Again, an assessment I did a few years ago. Yes, we shelve alarms. Yes, we manually record them in our alarm shelving book. There it is at the side of the console. I looked in the book and I found the last entry was 3 years prior to the assessment. I looked on the screen and said, "You've got quite a number of alarms shelved that aren't in this book." The procedure was there, but it wasn't being used. These are the kind of things you need to find out. You're going to find out a lot of these things when you interview your operations personnel at their workplace. You need to set aside around 60 to 90 minutes to do a complete interview with a guy. Put him at ease. I'm not here to find out if you're a good or bad operator. That's really important. I'm here to find out how well the system works for you. Start with your questions and let the guy take you off track, because regularly you will find an operator will say, "Oh, and have you seen this?" And he will direct you to areas of concern that you need to highlight in your report. Speaking to the operator is a really good tool. You're going to look at the operational use of the system. Is the guy actually doing, like the procedure, what he says he should be doing? What should be happening? You're going to look at training and competence. You're going to ask the operators, ask the supervisors, ask the personnel, have you been formally trained? Do you get refresher training? And then you need to follow that up with a training manager. Could I see some training records, please? Can I see when the last training was carried out? It's all part of your assessment. Communication I have down there. Yep, communication's important. We all communicate with everybody. You're going to go to, if they have them, an engineering morning meeting. You're going to sit in a shift handover, and many times that means you're staying behind till 6 or 8 o'clock at night. You may have to come at 6 o'clock in the morning. You need to sit, just observe, sit in the back of the meeting. I'm just here to listen. Do they actually talk about alarms? Do they communicate problems about alarms? Is it a formal part of their meeting, or is it informally done? Or basically, do they sit and talk about the football until it's time to go home and time to start your job? That's an important part, communication. An observation I've mentioned, you need to sit in those meetings, just listen, observe, watch. Are there any formal documents? So there's a huge amount of stuff that needs to be done in performing a successful and effective benchmark. And what you're going to ask me now is, how long is this going to take? Okay, if you have pre-prepared questionnaires, you have your software analysis tool, you have your standards and guidelines, you've got all those things ready, it's going to take you about 2 days to carry out a number of interviews with operators from different shifts, attending shift handover meetings, engineering meetings, going to find the environment person to look through the environmental permit to find and discuss with them, are there any implications for alarms? All that assessment, that's going to take you about 2 days to carry out that assessment. I generally take 3 days because I will do an opening presentation to tell people what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to be doing it. After I've carried out my 2 days, I will then do a closing presentation, which gives an overview on PowerPoint of these are the major things I've found. This is the basis for my report. That gives the client time to tell me, "I'm sorry, you didn't understand that, did you?" Or say, "Oh, right, oh, that's a big problem." It's a good communication tool to say, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to expand upon it, but these are the major points. Nothing comes as a shock. You're then going to write a report. Your report, if you do it properly, I always sectionalize things and put in what I'm looking for. What are the standards and the guidelines require? That's what I'm looking for. What have I actually found? What's the gap between them? That's my recommendation. Then decide on the classification of recommendation, mandatory, suggested, etc. That report's going to take you about 2 weeks. So to carry out a benchmark assessment, a successful, comprehensive, effective benchmark assessment is going to take about 3 weeks of your time. So what are the benefits of spending that amount of time? Okay, going back to our opening question, yes, you'll be able to answer those questions. Now you'll be able to say, yes, we're short on this, we need to do that, and we've identified it, and we're working on it, Mr. Regulator. So we have a plan in place, the regulators will be happy, your senior managers will be happy. So that's a good thing to do. So a benefit is you have those answers that at the beginning of the presentation, you weren't sure you could answer. By implementing your recommendations, you're going to improve things. Take the quick wins first. Highlight in your report some quick wins. Nuisance alarms, the most frequently occurring alarms. The number of times I've done assessments and put up the most frequently occurring alarms. Everyone in the room says, oh, look, yeah, we know what that is. Okay, here's a suggestion how you can deal with it. Yeah, we could do that. Great. If you get quick wins, you'll get people on board. People will be more likely to help with alarm management because it's not just you doing it, it's a team effort. They'll be more likely to be enthused because things are happening. They can see a change. And long term, you're going to have increased performance on safety, environment. You're going to have fewer plant trips and reduced operator stress. Your operators, you don't want stress in your company. I did an assessment where they had a safety cabinet in the control room. They had earplugs, they had light eye protection, and they had headache tablets because the alarm system rang and rang and rang all day long. The guys were going home with headaches. They were stressed. Once the system was dealt with, they didn't need those headache tablets at all. So you're going to improve the operators' lot, as well as productivity, safety, environmental performance. Okay, so you've got a lot of work to do for an assessment. It's not a straightforward calculation of numbers. What next? That's where your real work starts. You think 3 weeks is a long time? Alarm management is for the lifetime of your plant and alarm system. You're going to have to budget for this and prepare a realistic budget. You will need to ask people. It's a team effort. You will have to take people out of their jobs to help with things, with alarm reviews, if you rationalize your alarms. You may need to buy tools you may not have. For example, a software analysis tool like ProcessVue Analyzer. You may not have a master alarm database, and you need a tool like ProcessVue Guardian to manage your alarm database. You may not have the expertise to be able to carry out certain tasks and may need to bring in your control system vendor, third-party integrators, external consultants. You need to think about this carefully and plan from your workflow, like I showed you on one of the earlier slides. Plan what you need to do, budget, but be realistic. And then begin your improvements. It's a big journey, but it needs to be done. Hopefully, I haven't frightened you all. Hopefully you found this useful and interesting. I don't have any more slides to go now, but I do know that Jason has hopefully been managing the questions and looking at questions for me. My details are on the screen if you want to contact me or Mac Solutions with regard to benchmark assessment. It is a service we provide. I'm happy to come and do assessments of your systems. If you want a quotation for that, my details are on the screen. Any other services to do with alarm management, creating alarm philosophies, rationalizing alarms, we do all those things. Please contact us if you would like to. I'm now going to throw the floor open to Jason, who hopefully is managing the questions, and if there are questions, I shall do my best to answer them. Thank you for attending this webinar. We will have more webinars throughout the year, and I hope it's been of use, and I will now open the floor to questions. So if there are any questions, Jason, could you let me know, please?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Ian. Some quite thought-provoking and useful information in there, I think. Okay, so guys, if you do have any questions, please do fill out the interface that's available to you and send them over to us. We do have one already.
Okay.
The question is, which industries are mandatorily required to adapt alarm management according to SurveySue 3 or COMA 2015? So,
okay, well,
which industries?
The industries, it's not specifically an industry per se. It's, you need to look through the COMA regs, through the SurveySue directive. It's about the control of major accident hazards. So if you have to develop a report where you put mitigations in place for major incidents that could happen, i.e., part of the regulations include if you store over particular volumes of particular materials. If you have more than the required, the registered amount, then you fall within the SurveySue or the COMA regulations. If you have, for example, you may have a major gas pipe and major gas installations, and if the gas installation blows up, it's not about liquids, it's about gas. You have to mitigate that. How are you going to prevent that incident from happening? What safety measures do you have to put in place? So it's not about particular industries, a whole range of industries. The pharmaceutical plant I talked about was regulated under the COMA regulations because of the amount of particular materials they stored. It's a pharmaceutical, they make pills, but they were regulated under COMA as well. So it's not about particular industries. You need to understand the regulations. I'm sorry, and you need to read the regulations. I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful than that. It is about all industries could be. Water companies, for example, you think, okay, you're supplying water. Water's fairly clean, but water treatment plants hold huge volumes of chlorine. And depending on the amount of chlorine you store, you may fall under the COMA regulations. And most water companies fall under the COMA regulations for their water treatment plants. So it's not just about particular industries. I'm sorry, I can't be more clear than that. I hope that's answered your question.
Okay, thanks, Ian. So are there any more questions, anybody? We just have that one. I'll give you a few minutes just to either raise your hand or just quickly key in any more questions you may have. Okay.
Okay. Well,
nothing else coming up. Nothing else coming up, Ian. So
okay, if we've completed the questions that have been raised immediately, if I minimize that and go back to there, hopefully you can see my screen. Contact details for Mac Solutions and myself are on the screen. We're more than happy for you to contact us if you have other questions. As I say, we do offer all sorts of services to do with alarm management, and we can help you benchmark your system if you require that too. So please contact us if you need us. And unless there are any further questions arrived, Jason?
There's just one, and it's just, will this presentation be available for downloading? Yes, at some point we will make it available. We're planning on putting it on our YouTube channel as well, so we can let you know when that happens. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, thank you very much for attending. I see we've actually kept attendance throughout the presentation. No one's dropped off, so that's brilliant. It's obviously a topic of interest. I'm going to close the presentation now, and thank you all for your attendance, and thank Jason for his stewardship of questions and making sure the presentation went well. Thank you, Jason, and thank you all the people attending. I'm now going to close the presentation. Thank you, and we'll see you at our next webinar.